Welcome back to the Hard Skills Show, where we take a deep dive into the most challenging soft skills required to navigate leadership uncertainty, complexities, and change today and into the future. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Broncu, psychologist, leadership consultant, and founder of TowerScope. So, are you the kind of person who takes pride in sticking it out during difficult work situations to the point where you don't always know when it's time to move on, or have any strategy for how to know when it's time to endure versus when it's time to move on? That is what we are talking about today. And what's going to be really fun and special for today's conversation, aside from the hair color of my guest today, which is fabulous. If you're going to listen to this later, it's dyed really cool pink on the bottom. But what's really fun and special for today, in addition to that, is that I recall marveling at the decisions that our guest made in her career leaps, and when she went from leadership role to leadership role, and how she made those decisions, where some leaders might not have taken those leaps. And I've made some of the same kinds of leadership changes and decisions. So we're going to be comparing notes and sharing our combined insights. And I think it's a really great fit for this season's focus on endurance in leadership. So, talking with us today about this topic is Dr. Sonja Batten. Dr. Batten is an experienced and transformational leader, having served as an executive at Fortune 500 company, a chief clinical officer at a fast-growing nonprofit, and a senior executive in the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. She was also the first deputy director of the Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and Traumatic Brain Injury, and the first associate director for women's health research at Yale University. She's also a licensed clinical psychologist, a certified executive coach, and change management practitioner, and also provides training to mental health practitioners around the world on acceptance and commitment therapy. She has expertise in veteran mental health, suicide prevention, and helping emerging leaders find their authentic leadership style and voice, and has authored 2 books and dozens of scientific articles. If you haven't picked up, she has many, many interests, and well beyond that, many other interests outside of the world of the professional world as well. We were just talking about all of our ways of having fun as well. So welcome, and great to have you on the show, Sonja.
I am excited to be here, Mira.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Okay, so let's talk about how we met. Because I do think that's a really interesting way to start, how I got to start seeing your own career trajectory. Where we met, I was working at one of the Department of Veterans Affairs 17 mental health centers of excellence, and I was just starting out in my own sort of management career as a managing director of a post-deployment mental health study. And you were at that time already a senior executive, and I think probably a fairly early in your career, you rose to that level. And you were doing site visits for all of these centers of excellence, providing feedback about our, metrics and productivity and outcomes, and, how we sort of demonstrated and communicated our work, to make an impact. And so let's start with how you got to that level, the sort of decisions that you made, and what you learned from kind of like those leaps and changes.
Sure. So let's see. So where to start? Because I think we'll go backwards a little bit at some point. But as you said, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I specifically had an interest when I started my graduate training in working with individuals who had been through traumatic events. And so I picked a graduate program based on that. And my very first summer of graduate school, in between my first and second year, it was like time to find a summer job. And there's very little that you can do that you're actually qualified to do that's still in the field of mental health when you're starting off like that.
Yeah.
But there were a handful of summer internships at the Reno VA. And so I applied, and I got one of those 4 summer internship positions.
Wow.
And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. and I started working for the Department of Veterans Affairs. That first job started 10 days before my 21st birthday.
Oh,
So literally I can truly say that my entire career has been focused on veteran mental health. And so I took that job really just because it was the only job I could sort of get that was relevant. But I would say within 2 days, I fell in love with working with the veterans. I mean, like that.
mhm,
And really, although I always maintained my interest in just trauma in general, I especially loved working with veterans. And so, so I did a variety of, went to graduate school, did my internship, my postdoc, took my first job, which I think we'll talk about in a few minutes. But then for my second job, I ended up at the VA Maryland healthcare system in Baltimore, overseeing the PTSD programs there. And and so anyway, I left that job. It was great. And one day I came back to my office and I had a voicemail from one of probably the most important mentor that I ever had, Tony Zeiss.
mhm.
She wasn't my mentor yet then, but I had a voicemail from her, and she said in her inimitable Tony way. Hi, Sonja. This is Tony Zeiss. I'm calling with an opportunity for you. Give me a call back when you get a chance. And basically, what had happened was this was the summer of 2007. And for anyone who was paying attention to military health issues or who lived in the Washington, D.C. Area at that time, that was when the Walter Reed scandal happened, where so Walter Reed was the biggest military medical center, and it was found to have really terrible environment of care issues, mold on the walls, dirt, completely outdated, living situation for the service members who were there. And that triggered Congress all of a sudden in the summer of 2007 to start paying attention to veteran issues and especially veteran mental health issues. And so Congress appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars that summer to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury, TBI, for veterans and service members. And so all of a sudden, the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense had to figure out what to do with all that money. And it sounds like a good problem to have, but wow, is that a big challenge? And so they decided to start with what they called a red cell, which was a team of one PTSD focused person and one traumatic brain injury focused person from each of the four military services and from VA. So Tony was calling to see if I would be the VA PTSD person on that
Mhm, mhm.
for the next 4 or 5 months. And I lived in Baltimore, and it would mean commuting to DC. But I was like, yep, put me in. I'm ready. I don't even know what I'm agreeing to, but that sounds awesome. And I mean, probably my learning curve during those 5 months is like you couldn't even graph that learning curve, but that's really where I got interested in working with the Department of Defense and active duty personnel. Anyway, yada yada. Did that for about 5 months on that red cell. We made some recommendations about how VA and DoD could spend $300 million. And then I went back to my regular job, but then there was this opportunity to be the deputy director of the new Defense Centers of Excellence for psychological health and TBI. So I did that for 2 years. Again, that was one of those jobs as we talk about, how to make decisions to leave. That was, uh, also an interesting process of deciding to leave that job. But you're asking about how I got to the job where I'm at. So then I did that job at the Center of Excellence for 2 years, and then again, there were some leadership shifts in the central oversight office for developing VA mental health policy, and Tony Zeiss was going to take on the role of the chief officer for VA mental health, and she asked me to leave the position I was in and come over to be one of her two deputies. So that's how I got there. And really the life lesson that I would share, especially with more junior folks, is here's the only reason that Tony Zeiss knew who I was. I had never trained, I had met her before. Like I knew who she was. She didn't know who I was, except the year before that at a conference that sort of academic psychology people would go to. I had asked her just out of the blue with a lot of chutzpah if she would be the discussant on a panel I was
Mm.
submitting to the conference. And she agreed to do that. She was on the panel. I guess the panel went okay. So that then when there was this opportunity and they needed to pull somebody in for this opportunity, she thought of me. But it's only because I sort of took that bold opportunity to ask her if she would be a discussant, that she thought of me. So
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah, so I ended up at VA central office, and yeah, and we can get into then how I came to know who you were.
Yeah, yeah. And well, I can pick up from there because, first of all, for those who, plenty of you don't know who Dr. Tony Zeiss is. Um, she, I believe, was the first psychologist to serve and the first woman psychologist to serve as chief officer of mental health within the Department of Veterans Affairs. So that alone, you know, um, is an amazing experience, to be plucked by, and have like mentorship, right? And I think the connection with, my own experience is that is how I came to get to know you as well. Is that I had, somebody who self-appointed himself as my mentor, Dr. John Fairbank, of the Center of Excellence where I was working, and he saw things in me that I did not see in myself. And there came a time when there was a lot of turmoil at another center, and plenty of other people were asked to help and declined. And so it's sort of like you had put out the call: who is willing to go there and help with this, center that was under, high turmoil and volatility, and offered some support. And John put my name forth, and you and I talked,
And
and
and and to be specific, I said I need somebody who is not going to be easily rattled,
mm,
um, somebody who can sit sort of in ambiguity, but at the most important thing is somebody with the highest level of ethics. I
mm,
said content wise and leadership wise, we'll make sure that the person has whatever they need and the support so they can learn. But those things can't be taught.
fascinating, so interesting. I never heard that part of the story. That's amazing. So anyway, all I heard was John said, Mira has the raw materials. So I guess those were the raw
Those are
materials.
the raw materials, yeah.
And so I think another thing that we could take away from this is how, how much mentorship and sponsorship can help, especially women and underrepresented folks have those opportunities, but also being open and willing to look for opportunities and jump into an opportunity, despite how scared we are, right? Because of our interest in being stretched and challenged and desire to grow. And I think that, is an important part of this as well. So we're reaching an ad break. When we come back, I'd love to sort of get into a few other sort of pivotal moments in your life where you had to make these big decisions and what you pulled from them. And you're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Sonja Batten. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. At that time, if you're here right now at that time, you can find us live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and several other locations at talkradio.nyc. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with my guest today, Dr. Sonja Batten. So, Sonja, before we go backwards to a few other really interesting pivotal moments, I want to sort of move us forward just a little bit. After this, you were in this role, and I saw you, traveling around, providing lots of feedback, people looking to you to provide guidance around how to strengthen the centers of excellence and the value that they provided. You decided to leave VA. And it was at a time when you could have easily continued and gone higher and higher in leadership roles. Like, that was clear that you could have continued on that trajectory. And so, and at that time, it was fairly unconventional to leave federal government employment. People stuck around forever. And like that still happens to this day, but not as common for sure back then. So that was probably a surprise to a lot of people for many reasons, right? And so I am really curious, how did you come to that decision? What pressures were you experiencing? What objections were you facing? And how did you still sort of like feel like, no, this is the right thing for me?
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, I literally fell in love with working with veterans. I loved working in the VA. I worked in many different VA hospitals, and then I went to VA headquarters. And that job that I had when I met you, not only was I overseeing those centers of excellence, that was just a part of what I was doing. I was the deputy chief in charge of all specialty mental health policy for the entire Department of Veterans Affairs. So we had like a $7.5 billion service line, 21,000 mental health employees, and we were setting policy for how those mental health employees would carry out their jobs, sort of in the best interests of veterans. It's the best job I've ever had. I would still say that, even to my current employer, because it just had such breadth. And as another one of our mentors, Paul Schnur, once said, you just get to paint with such a big paintbrush. Like there's nothing like it. It was just an amazing honor and opportunity to have that job. And toward the end of my time there, so I was in that role for 4 years. And then Tony Zeiss, who we've talked about, she retired, and I got asked to be the acting chief officer for mental health. So I did that for 9 months, and again, it was great in many ways. The part that I could not stand, though, is the influence of politics in what we were being asked to do. And it seems honestly sort of ridiculous to say that now, because like
Yeah.
it's like hardly even comparable.
Right. Yeah.
But it was the same, thing that I could not stand. And also, I got experience that was like, on the one hand, cool experience. I got to like testify in front of Congress. And I'm not a shrinking violet. I don't mind public speaking if people actually want to hear what I have to say. I
Hmm.
can answer hard questions. I can roll with the punches. But you know what? When you testify to Congress, that is not what's happening. You are there for political theater. You are a pawn for both sides of the aisle trying to make their points. They don't really actually care what you have to say. And just the level of political uh, interference with trying to set policies, even from an administration that I very much respected, I did not appreciate. And it just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And I finally was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not meant to be anyone's pawn. And there are other things I could be doing with my time.
Yeah.
And I
And
had
can I,
been, and I had been somebody who had expected to be in VA my entire career. I had
yeah.
expected.
Yeah. And can I just sort of add, I'm resonating with this because after you, there was one person in between, Wendy Tenhula. She did an amazing job. I had the opportunity to support her for many years, and that led to a point in time when I applied for that position and was offered the position, and I actually declined it, which of course, to everybody's shock and dismay, and mainly because of some of the same reasons. I did not want to spend my time arguing with Congress because, and I loved so many parts of what I was doing supporting that role, but it would fully take me away from all the things that I loved so much about being in the support role for that role.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let keep going with
So
sort of
so
the
anyway,
yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I mean, I had been getting less and less satisfied, more and more frustrated, and sort of noticing that. And then I think, when I think about leaving most of these jobs, there's usually a moment where my gut just tells me, mm-mm, we're done.
Mhm.
And I remember that moment for this job. I was in a senior leader's office, and this senior leader was trying to convince me to stay in that chief officer role permanently, to apply for and stay in that role permanently. And I was just, I could not, I guess, convey to this person how problematic I felt like some parts of it were. And I didn't feel like they were going to support me. And then this is somebody that I respect very much, but in that moment they said, "Come on, Sonja, just do something for the organization for a change." And I was
Oh.
like, "What?" Like, I've been giving my body and mind and spirit to this job for a long time. And to say something like that, that was just the end of it for me.
Mm.
Because not out of spite, but just because it sort of crystallized that it didn't matter how much of myself I gave, it was never going to be enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of what helped you make this decision and for it to be so clear was um feeling like the things that mattered most to you were underappreciated, and the things that mattered most to others, you found mostly frustrating.
Yeah.
And that was such a disconnect or misalignment between values and desires and goals.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, and the only tweak I would add to that is like underappreciated and just not like didn't have the ability to execute on the things that were most important.
Yeah, yeah. And that feeling like I have had the same experience where the things that mattered most to me, that excited me most, that energized me most, if I couldn't do those things, I felt like a bird with its wings clipped, like that I couldn't use the best assets that I had available. I just had to sort of like sit there, in this little, sort of containment, and not able to provide my very best. And that is really hard. And especially for people who are ambitious, high achievers, like feeling held back, it feels bad, because then you feel like you're actually a low performer,
Right.
when you are actually naturally a high performer.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to describe that. But yes, exactly.
Yeah. So you were also in another very high profile job at Yale University. You didn't stick around longer than, I guess, a year. And again, from the outside, people might say, gosh, she was in such a prestigious situation. Like, how could she let that go? Right. And so share with us a little bit about the difference between what it's like being in a high level, high profile, prestigious situation, but something that doesn't necessarily match where you'd like to go, or how you make that decision about enduring versus not enduring in that kind of situation.
Yeah, so again, I had this great honor. My first real job after postdoc was that I was the associate director for women's health research at Yale, which so mission wise totally aligned.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and everybody I was working with was super smart and hardworking and committed to making either women's lives better or understanding gender differences in physical and mental health. Like, mission was great. And the challenge was the parts that I was being asked to spend my time on, um, like just basically what we were just saying. Like, I knew that in this specific case, fundraising was going to be part of the job because we were working to permanently endow the program. So I knew it was going to be part of the job. However, what I didn't know is that it was going to be like getting into the like heavy part of a recession when I started that job. And so charitable giving went way down. And so
Mm.
we were having to work really hard on
Mm.
fundraising. And so the amount of time that I was spending on science and directing women's health research and gender-based differences in health, and the amount of time that I was spending on fundraising started to shift dramatically. And I can do fundraising, but it is not something that brings me passion and satisfaction. And I found myself 8 months into the job, sitting on a Saturday in a board of directors or advisory board meeting, like a fundraising meeting with all of these, wonderful, committed, dedicated, wealthy people talking about how to raise money. And I sat there in this meeting on a Saturday and just getting like more and more frustrated and just wanting to crawl out of my skin.
Mm.
And as I sat there in that board meeting, I composed in my head an email to somebody who I had turned down a job 8 months before, where I was explaining, like, I know you don't have a job available, but here's where I am, and I'm just wondering if you can keep an eye out for me. And I sat there in that meeting and I thought, you are crazy. You are literally crazy. You have a faculty job at Yale. Like, what is wrong with you? But my gut, I had this like pressure that to write this email. And so I got home from the meeting on that Saturday afternoon, and I just raced up to my computer. I sat there, I drafted that email, and I said, "You are insane. I'm not going to send it." It was to Alan Bellick. But I wrote it and attached the CV. I said, "Okay, I'm going to sleep on it. And I'm going to see how I feel. Maybe I'm just frustrated." I woke up the next morning on Sunday morning, and all I wanted to do was press send on that email. And you know what? By the end of Sunday afternoon, he wrote and said, "Well, yeah, we don't have a position open, but actually, I've been talking to the director of mental health here, and we need you." Um, so trusting my gut, even when on paper it seemed like a really dumb thing to do, and it was no regrets.
Yeah, yeah. I think that a few things I'm pulling from that. One is um, that you were paying really close attention to your reactions, your feelings, your level of frustration, and you were able to separate that from what I call the allure of prestige, which can be a huge pull for so many people and keep people, um, held back in roles, feeling miserable for way longer than necessary. And it sounds like you personally have a lower level of tolerance for misery than others, or a higher level of appreciation and recognition for that there are other possibilities around the corner.
Yeah, confidence that I'll figure something out.
Yeah. So let's hold on to that, because I'm really interested in pulling that thread a little bit more. We are reaching an ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Sonja Batten. And we'll be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Sonja Batten. And we, before the ad break, we were talking about how you sort of more naturally than maybe some others lean into a certain level of confidence, that opportunities are around the corner and you'll make it. And I'm not sure everybody has that mindset, which is why it holds them back and keeps them stuck for way longer than necessary. I'm super curious, like where did that belief system or confidence come from?
Yeah, I think that it is like, I want to be clear because it's going to sound I don't know, maybe going to sound overly confident or arrogant or something here. Like I want to be clear, there are plenty of places in my life that I have been not confident. Really, I promise. But achieving like academically and occupationally, like I think that I'm fortunate that I'm one of those people who was like good at school and good at standardized tests and like liked my teachers and got lots of good feedback at school, and family was supportive of, that I was smart and could achieve things. And so I think I was very fortunate to both, have the raw material and the support along the way, that that even when other things in my life were not going the way that I wanted them to, I could generally make school and work,
Hmm.
go positively. And yeah, so I think I just sort of trusted that that I could figure it out. Now, I would not have like left any of those jobs without having the next job. Like, I'm not that confident.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was confident enough to at least start looking.
Yeah. And I think if I could add another piece to what I'm hearing that you did really well, that I don't think a lot of women especially do well, um, and especially folks within the federal government, they do this terribly, is you were a great networker, somebody who developed and maintained and cultivated relationships with mentors, with, just going up to Tony's Ice, or contacted another, mentor to see what's out there, and a lot of people end up with this belief that if they just do a good job and their supervisor sees them do a good job, their supervisor will then help them with their entire career, which is not true at all. You do have to plant seeds, you do have to cultivate relationships, and you cannot possibly put all of your um, faith in one person to take care of your entire career, future, and needs, because those change over time. And you, as very early in your career, automatically sort of like had that understood, which I don't think a lot of people recognize.
Yeah, I think I was fortunate. I mean, I can look back to in college, I had two psychology professors who really took an interest in me personally, and I felt like, oh, like that people will support me. And then I went to grad school and had two professors who, again, were like very high profile, but like would, I could talk to just as a normal human being. They were very much themselves and authentic. And my internship, my postdoc, I've just been really fortunate to have good mentors and people who would introduce me to people, and then it's a certain point, it's not about them introducing, it's about me just stepping up and reaching out, but having the confidence to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that confidence that there's an opportunity around the corner, or that you can make it, doesn't have to come from the same place. Like for me, it comes from a very, very different place. And that is, as an immigrant and seeing my parents struggle, um, there is no option for failure. There is absolutely no option for failure. So I sort of have come to recognize that in myself, that I won't allow myself to fail, because that is not an option. And so I must take the risk, just like they did, much huger risk they took, to come to this country with literally nothing, and, build something from that, and being able to see that, and that like you can, do that. With the right support system, with people who care about you, like you have had as well. Yeah. And surrounding yourself with that, folks who can inspire you and push you, right?
Right. And just realizing that, like, with some of those things, like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, okay, your email goes unread, or you get, like a snarky response back, or who cares? Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, those sorts of things, they seem very high risk,
Hmm.
but they're really not. Like, going out on your own and starting a business, and there are definitely higher risk things, um but I think sometimes we tell ourselves stories that like the statistic that women when they're applying for jobs, like wait until they're, have 85% of the job requirements, like that they're qualified for them before they'll even apply for a job. Whereas that's not the case for men. They'll just apply with a lot, um, you know, not as concerned about how much they meet the job requirements. There's studies about that. And so it's sort of like that, like just like, well, who cares? So you apply for the job. See what's the worst that can happen. So you reach out to somebody, you try something new. Okay, you know,
Yeah,
all right.
absolutely. Yeah. And so speaking of that, um, for those who have not been tracking kind of where I am with my own career, last week I also left the federal government. And yes, technically, I did have to have all my ducks in a row. I didn't just leap. It was 7 years in the making. It would have been 10, but I was ready. And I was waiting to see how my company, which I was growing on the side, was doing and tracking a bunch of metrics to see, can I, will this be viable? Will this be sustainable? And, July 1st was my last day with the federal government. And that was a big leap for me as an immigrant who, like, literally is obsessed with financial stability to just go right into the company. But it was because I had to check off a number of sort of the areas where I felt were risky. And I'm curious, what, as you think about the federal workforce right now, people who are coming to you for advice, people that you're seeing either thinking about leaving the federal government or leaving even without a plan, which makes me nervous as a planful person. What advice do you have about how to navigate those decisions, whether to endure during a time of high stress and volatility within the federal government, and or how to sort of have that mindset of surviving and thriving?
Yeah, and I have, because like we've talked about, I worked in the federal government a long time, so I have lots of people reaching out to me now.
Mm,
Both friends and then people I'm doing coaching with. And so I've seen people across that entire spectrum. I've seen I think you have to decide which of your interests are most, and by interests I mean like your needs, your requirements, which of your sort of requirements takes precedence right now. Because for some people, they are like this close to retirement and getting those
mm,
benefits that they've worked really hard for, and they feel like they can endure for just a little bit longer. And so some of it is you just knowing, like you're saying, your financial stability goals. Like if somebody is like really needs to make sure those things are in order, then prioritize that and figure out how to get support to deal with the frustration in the meantime so you can reach your goals. On the other hand, I have friends who have only been in government a couple of years and they're like, peace out. Like, this is an easy decision because it's obviously not going anywhere for me. The harder part are the people who are sort of in the middle.
yeah,
And
yeah.
they're the people who like loved their job until recently.
Mm,
They had that sense of meaning and passion, and what they're doing is less and less of that stuff that they like, and more of the frustration. And what I keep telling them is like, I promise you, there's life after the federal government. There really
mm,
is. I live it. You're about to live it.
yeah.
There's life after the federal government. But I think it's a balance. Like I encourage people to like figure out the practical things, like, you actually get a partial pension even if you don't stay the whole 30 years. You get a partial pension. You don't lose it as long as you've been in for 5 years or something like
I
that.
remember you giving me that advice a few years ago. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And so like testing out those like all or nothing assumptions about, if I leave, I lose everything that I've put into this. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. And so really like looking into the practical, but then also trusting your gut and knowing, like, are you being eaten alive from inside, and how much longer can you stand to do that? Or do you want to stand to do that? And different people will have different answers to that. There's not a right answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the ways that I've helped leaders and helped myself is even visualizing, like, you know, if there is a wall, right, that is being built in front of me, and at some point I feel like I'm trapped, what are the bricks that are adding to that wall? And where is my limit of how tall that wall is going to be for me?
Yeah. And only you can decide that. And your level of tolerance at this point in your life is different than it would have been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years from now. Like it varies, and it's okay to just look at it for right now. Where am I with that
Yeah,
wall?
I really appreciate that recognizing that whatever it is that you planned in one phase of your life, you're in a different phase now. If you are, there's a different set of criteria that you might need to be judging this against, and that there's no judgment about that. It's just a different phase of life. So I appreciate that additional piece to it. Yeah. So I can't believe we're at another ad break. This is crazy.
Unacceptable.
Unacceptable. Anyway, we are at an ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Sonja Batten, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
Cheers!
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Sonja Batten. And we're talking about endurance and leadership when it comes to those pivotal moments, those hard decisions, enduring in leadership, when you are kind of stuck making a hard decision or taking a leap. And we've covered a lot of bases here. We've covered mentorship and surrounding yourself with people who care about your future. We've talked about the aspect of networking or building and cultivating relationships with people who care about your future and could help. And we've talked about sort of trusting your gut and recognizing, when you're starting to feel like something's off or misaligned. And we've also talked about, like, how you can leave a job that you are deeply committed to and love. And we've both certainly done that. I loved my jobs and my roles with the mental health centers of excellence. So did Sonja. And yet there came a time when it just felt a little off. We weren't necessarily growing or being challenged in the ways that we needed, right? And then, making big leaps, leaving the federal government and looking within to think about what are your needs right now in this phase of your life, and that there is life outside of the organization that you're with. So with all of that in mind, Sonja, I'd love to hear kind of like how would you pull all of this together in terms of the lessons that you've learned about what is worth trying to endure and what isn't when you are committed to whichever sort of job, role, passion, career you've made a decision around. How do you know?
Well, I'm realizing there's sort of one set of factors that we haven't talked about,
Mm.
and that's when things are toxic.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah.
If you have a toxic boss, if you're in some sort of other toxic situation, or if just how you are coping with the stress is toxic, which
Absolutely.
which again is not a ding on you. It just is. And so like I have a friend who, Jan Kemp, who she worked in the federal government for 30 years. She did retire, but you know what? She also worked herself to death. She
Mm.
retired and then died, a few months later.
Mm.
And so I think like, and she was so committed to her job and she loved her job, but you know what? She was so committed that it was to the detriment of her own health. And so I think like making sure that you're paying attention to those things. Like on the other hand, I have one friend who is like a master at compartmentalizing, and she can go to work and she can be like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to do my job. And then she goes home and she does not think about it. So you have to know who you are. Are you somebody who is part of your self-worth and value is defined by your job? Well, I kind of am. I mean, like it's a big part of who I am, being a psychologist and caring about what I do and having a mission. And so for me, if I'm in a situation where I'm not being able to, like you talked about several times, being able to express your skills in the best way, or there's something that's just like really off, that affects me at a fundamental level. That it's not like that for everybody. So you
Yeah.
have to sort of know yourself and know like, can I put this in a box when I go home at the end of the day? And it's frustrating during the day, but then it doesn't affect the whole rest of my life. Or is it truly affecting everything in your life and how you're interacting with your friends and your family and your kids and your health? Like I think those are some things to consider. But not minimizing it if there is something that's truly toxic or unhealthy.
Yeah, I really appreciate that so, we talk so much about leaving a toxic workplace and what that looks like, et cetera, et cetera. We really do not talk a lot about when are my responses to the situation toxic, and either toxic to me, in your example, perfect example of that is, address not recognizing the impact on your health, or in my case, and I think a lot of people in this situation don't know necessarily what it looks like when they're under high stress. High achievers especially they push and push and push and push, and they don't always recognize when they've hit that moment where they're actually in a high stress response and it's a derailer, it's becoming a derailer, right? And so I've learned over time to recognize that in myself and to like start tracking, am I not being my best any longer? And know what that looks like. And that is not something that a lot of, people do. But I think it's critical because when you can do that, you can make way better decisions. Like, okay, this is no longer at my best, and that feels bad. And I might be affecting other people too in the, as a result, and that's not good either, right?
No.
So,
and I think like that change can happen so gradually
yes,
that
yeah,
you yourself don't actually notice that you have been changed.
yes,
But the people around you can. So asking them for input, like when I left that VA job that I loved, but it was not right for me anymore at the time, it took me like 9 months. My husband said like it was like 9 months of like a hard shell starting to come off of me because I had built up that toughness and that hardness to get through the parts that were hard for me in that role. And I think we don't necessarily see it in ourselves, but you could ask people that are important to you in your life whether they've seen any changes.
absolutely. Really great insights. I often talk about detoxing from your last role before you jump right into your next role, if you can. Even just a little bit of time to be able to go through the things that you've mentioned as well. So, Sonja, we could talk about this forever, but I'm noticing we're at the last minute here. Those of you who want to find her, learn more about her work, you can go to sonjabatten.com. That is SonjaBatten.com. And also flexibleedgesolutions.com. Tell us very quickly, what do you do with Flexible Edge Solutions and at Sonja Batten?
Yeah, so sonjabatten.com, that's where I do my like acceptance and commitment therapy training, which I do either remotely or in person. The Flexible Edge Solutions, that's my executive coaching and leadership training business. And so that's something that I love that brings me joy to continue to help mentor people. And yeah, so feel free to reach out if anyone's interested in even just a short, like 3 sessions or something to help you think through whether it's time to stay or go, or just hit me up on LinkedIn. If you tell me that you heard about it on this podcast, I'll give you a discount. So.
Awesome. Look at that. Hope you're following up on that. That's amazing. So, audience, what did you take away? More importantly, what is one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Sonja? Share it with us on LinkedIn. We will cheer you on. And if today's episode resonated for you, make sure that you subscribe and or share with others who might be interested. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. Together, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. And thank you for joining me and Dr. Sonja Batten today on this journey. This is Dr. Mira Brancu signing off. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles. Bye-bye, everybody.